Frank Miller woke up before sunrise, just as he had done every day for the past 40 years. The small cabin by the shore creaked as the morning wind picked up. He made a cup of black coffee and looked out the window at the gray waters of the Pacific. The weather seemed good for fishing. Not perfect, but good enough. Frank was 63 years old now. His face was lined with wrinkles from years of squinting at the sun reflecting off the water. His hands were rough and calloused from handling fishing nets and boat ropes. Some people in the small coastal town of Port Angeles thought he should retire. Frank just smiled when they said this. The ocean was his life. His boat, the Morning Light, was not impressive or fancy. The 20-foot vessel had seen better days. Paint peeled from its sides and the motor sometimes made strange noises, but Frank maintained it carefully and it had never let him down in all these years. By 5:30 a.m., Frank had loaded his gear and pushed off from the shore. A light fog hung over the water. This was normal for spring mornings. It would likely clear up by midday. Seagulls circled overhead, their calls breaking the early morning quiet. Going to be a good day, Frank said to himself. He often talked out loud when alone on his boat. After his wife Ellen died 5 years ago, the habit had become more frequent. The ocean was his only consistent companion now. He navigated by memory and feeling more than by instruments. Frank knew every rock, every current, and every good fishing spot within 50 miles of the coast. He could sense changes in the weather before any storm app could warn him. This knowledge had saved his life more than once. 2 hours out from shore. Frank cut the engine. This spot had been good to him lately. Schools of cod had been passing through, and he hoped today would be the same. He prepared his nets and began to cast them into the dark water. The work was rhythmic and familiar. Cast the net, wait, pull it in, sort the catch. Repeat. Frank's muscles moved automatically through the routine he had performed thousands of times. The morning passed quietly as his cooler slowly filled with fish. It was just before noon when Frank first noticed the change. The seagulls, which had been following his boat all morning hoping for scraps, suddenly flew away. All of them at once. Frank looked up, puzzled by their behavior. Then he noticed something else strange. The waves had stopped. The surface of the water became unnaturally smooth like glass. What in the world, he muttered, looking around. That's when the sky darkened. At first, Frank thought it was a sudden storm cloud. But storms didn't move like this. The darkness spread across the sky in a perfect circle, as if something massive was blocking the sun. Frank shaded his eyes and looked up. His mouth fell open. In shock, a ship hung in the air above him. Not a boat or an airplane, but something entirely different. It was enormous, at least a mile across, with a metallic surface that reflected the ocean below. It made no sound. It simply hovered there, defying gravity. Frank's radio crackled to life with panicked voices. This is Coast Guard Station Port Angeles. All vessels, be advised of unusual aerial phenomenon offshore. Return to port immediately. Repeat, return to port immediately. But Frank couldn't move. He stood frozen, watching as smaller objects detached from the massive ship. These smaller craft, each about the size of a bus, descended toward the ocean surface. They were smooth and oval-shaped, with no visible windows or doors. 3 of them touched down on the water about half a mile from Frank's boat, causing barely a ripple despite their size. Frank's first instinct was to start his engine and head back to shore as fast as possible, but curiosity kept him in place. He had lived his entire life on these waters. If something was happening here, he wanted to know what it was. The small vessels began to open, sections of their hulls sliding apart. From inside emerged figures. From this distance, Frank couldn't make out details, but they were clearly not human. Their movements were too fluid, their limbs too numerous. One of the creatures raised what looked like an arm. A beam of blue light shot from it into the ocean. The water where the light touched began to glow and swirl. Frank grabbed his old binoculars from under the seat to get a better look. Through the lenses, he could see the creatures more clearly. They stood on 4 leg-like limbs, with 4 more arm-like appendages sprouting from their upper bodies. Their skin, if it was skin, looked slick and bluish-gray. Their heads were oddly shaped, with no visible eyes or mouth that Frank could recognize. More beams of light shot into the water. Whatever they were doing, they seemed very focused on their task. They paid no attention to Frank's small fishing boat nearby. Frank's radio continued to broadcast emergency messages. The Coast Guard was ordering all boats back to shore. Military aircraft were being scrambled. World leaders were calling emergency meetings. The aliens, because what else could they be, had apparently landed in oceans all over the globe simultaneously. As Frank watched, one of the creatures turned and seemed to look directly at him. Even without recognizing any familiar facial features, Frank felt the weight of its attention. It raised one of its limbs and pointed at him. Frank's heart raced. He considered starting his engine and fleeing, but something told him that would be pointless. Instead, he did what felt natural. He raised his hand and waved. The creature tilted its head, then mimicked the gesture with one of its upper limbs. Before Frank could react further, his radio crackled again. This time it wasn't the Coast Guard or any human voice he recognized. The sound that came through was like nothing he had ever heard. Clicks and hums and strange tonal shifts. Then, to his shock, the sounds transformed into heavily accented but understandable English. People of Water Planet. We are Kaltorians. We come seeking resources. Your leaders have been contacted. Do not interfere with collection procedures. Frank stared at his radio in disbelief. The message repeated once more before the radio returned to the chaos of emergency broadcasts and confused ship captains calling for information. As the sun began to set, Frank finally started his engine. The Kaltorian vessels were still there, still shooting beams of light into the water, still extracting whatever they had come for. Frank turned his boat toward shore, his mind racing with questions. He didn't know it yet, but his lifetime of knowledge about the oceans would soon become humanity's most unexpected advantage in dealing with these visitors from beyond the stars. The aliens had technology beyond imagination, but they didn't understand Earth's oceans. Not like Frank did, not like someone who had listened to the sea's secrets for 40 years. As darkness fell, the lights from the alien ships reflected on the water's surface, creating an eerie glow that guided Frank home to a world forever changed. 3 weeks had passed since the Kaltorians arrived. The world had changed in ways nobody could have predicted. After the initial panic, governments established contact with the aliens. The Kaltorians claimed they came in peace. They only wanted to extract certain minerals from Earth's oceans. In exchange, they offered technology that would solve many human problems. Most people accepted this arrangement. The Kaltorians kept their massive ships far from populated areas. They placed smaller extraction platforms in remote ocean locations. News channels showed the alien ambassador Zenthal signing agreements with world leaders. Everything seemed fine on the surface, but Frank Miller knew something was wrong. He saw it in his daily catches. The fish were fewer. Some species appeared in places they shouldn't be. Others had disappeared completely. The water temperature felt different too. Frank had been fishing these waters for 40 years. He could sense the changes that others might miss. One morning, Frank noticed a new building at the edge of town. The sign read, Pacific Response Center. Government vehicles filled the parking lot. People in lab coats walked in and out. Frank normally avoided such official places, but his concern for the ocean was stronger than his dislike for bureaucracy. Inside, Frank asked to speak to someone about the ocean changes. The young receptionist looked at him doubtfully but made a call. After a long wait, a woman approached. She wore glasses and had her hair pulled back tightly. I'm Dr. Samantha Wright, lead oceanographer here. How can I help you? Her voice was polite but rushed. Name's Frank Miller. Been fishing these waters 40 years. Something's wrong with the ocean since those aliens came. Thought someone should know. Dr. Wright's expression softened slightly. We appreciate citizen observations, Mr. Miller, but we have state-of-the-art monitoring equipment and direct contact with marine research centers worldwide. The Kaltorian extraction is being carefully supervised. Frank nodded. He had expected this response. Just thought I'd mention the red tide, a bloom forming near the extraction site. Never seen one there this time of year. This caught her attention. Red tide? Our monitors show no algal blooms in that sector. Might not show up on your equipment yet, it's just starting. Fish are avoiding the area already. Dr. Wright frowned. That's impossible. The Kaltorians assured us their process doesn't affect microorganisms. Frank shrugged. Ocean doesn't care what they promised. It responds to what's happening, not what's supposed to happen. Something in his calm certainty made Dr. Wright pause. She asked Frank to wait and returned with a tablet showing ocean charts. Could you point out exactly where you noticed this bloom? Frank studied the digital map. It didn't show things the way he was used to seeing them, but he could read water, no matter how it was presented. He pointed to an area about 12 miles offshore. Right there. And give it 3 days, it'll spread here and here. His weathered finger traced a pattern along the coastline. Dr. Wright made notes. What else have you noticed? Water's 2 degrees warmer than it should be this time of year. Current pattern has shifted. Salmon are running late. Crab traps coming. Up empty in spots that were good just last month. For the next hour, Frank described all the changes he had observed. Dr. Wright asked detailed questions. By the end, she was typing rapidly on her tablet. Mr. Miller, would you be willing to come back tomorrow? I'd like some of my colleagues to hear this. Frank nodded. I'll come after my morning run. Usually back by noon. The next day, Frank found himself sitting in a conference room with 5 scientists. They showed him computer models of ocean behavior. The models predicted small changes from the Kaltorian extraction, but nothing serious. Your models are wrong, Frank said simply. They don't match what's actually happening out there. One scientist, a younger man with a beard, looked annoyed. These models incorporate data from hundreds of ocean sensors and satellites. Machines can only measure what they're designed to measure, Frank replied. They miss things that don't fit their programming. And you don't? The young scientist challenged. I miss plenty. Difference is, I know I miss things. I adjust based on what the ocean tells me, not what I tell it. Before the argument could continue, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. People rushed into the room. Someone turned on a large screen, showing a map of the coast. Red warning symbols flashed. Seismic activity near the northern extraction platform, Dr. Wright announced. Possible underwater landslide. Tsunami warning in effect. The room erupted in activity. Scientists called out readings. Someone mentioned evacuation procedures. Frank studied the map quietly. It'll hit north of us, he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. Everyone turned to look at him. What did you say? Dr. Wright asked. Frank pointed to the map. Underwater ridge here will redirect most of the energy northward. We'll get some action, but not the full force. You've got about 3 hours before the water reaches us. It'll be half as high as your computers are saying. The young bearded scientist scoffed. That's not how tsunami dynamics work, Dr. Wright looked between her team and the old fisherman. Making a decision, she pulled up a detailed ocean floor map. Show me this ridge. Frank traced a line with his finger. It wasn't marked on their chart, but when Dr. Wright zoomed in and switched to a higher resolution view, a subtle elevation appeared exactly where he had indicated. How did you know that was there? She asked. This is new bathymetric data that we just received last week. Fished over it for decades. You can feel it in how the currents move above it. Another scientist quickly ran calculations based on the ridge's position. His face showed surprise. He's right. The model changes significantly with this feature factored in. Dr. Wright made a quick decision. Adjust our response according to Mr. Miller's prediction, but maintain standard precautions in case he's wrong. 3 hours later, the tsunami reached their shores. Just as Frank had predicted, it was much smaller than initially feared and hit hardest well north of their position. The facility suffered, only minor flooding in lower areas. That evening, as cleanup operations began, Dr. Wright found Frank helping move equipment to higher ground. How did you know? She asked simply. Frank paused his work. Spent my life on these waters. You learn to read them like a book. The Kaltorians said their technology can predict all ocean behaviors, that they understand our waters completely. Frank shook his head. Nobody understands the ocean completely, especially not visitors who just got here. Dr. Wright looked out at the darkening waters. We have a meeting with the Kaltorian science team tomorrow. Would you consider joining us? Frank hesitated. He preferred his quiet life on the water to meetings and politics. But something was happening to his ocean, and he couldn't ignore it. What time? He asked. 9 in the morning. Dr. Wright replied, a small smile of relief crossing her face. Frank nodded. I'll be there. As he walked home along the shore that night, Frank looked up at the giant alien ship visible in the distance. They had technology, beyond imagination, but they had missed something important. The ocean wasn't just water and minerals. It was a living, changing system. You couldn't truly know it through machines and models alone. Tomorrow, he would try to make them understand that. Frank arrived at the Pacific Response Center early the next morning. He had put on his least worn flannel shirt and a clean pair of jeans. It wasn't much, but it was his version of formal clothing. The security guard at the entrance looked surprised to see him but let him in after checking a list. Dr. Wright met him in the lobby. She seemed different today, more tense, less certain. Thank you for coming, Mr. Miller, she said. The meeting has gotten bigger than I expected. There will be government officials and military personnel present. The Kaltorian ambassador himself is attending. Frank nodded, suddenly regretting his decision to come. He was just a fisherman. What business did he have in a room with important people and aliens? Just tell them what you told me, Dr. Wright said, sensing his discomfort. Your observations matter. They walked into a large conference room. About 20 people sat around, a long table. Some wore uniforms with many badges. Others wore expensive suits. At the far end of the table sat 3 Kaltorians. Frank had only seen them from a distance before. Up close, they were even stranger. Their bluish-gray skin seemed to shimmer slightly. Each had 4 arms and 4 legs. Their heads had no hair, just smooth skin with small ridges. Where eyes should be, they had 3 oval-shaped organs that glowed faintly. They wore no clothing, but patches of their skin changed color in patterns that might have been some kind of insignia. The tallest, Kaltorian, sat in the middle. Dr. Wright whispered to Frank, "That's Ambassador Zenthal." A man in a dark suit stood and introduced himself as the National Security Advisor. He began the meeting with formal greetings and a summary of the situation. The tsunami warning had triggered emergency protocols. Questions were being raised about the safety of Kaltorian extraction methods. Zenthal's response came through a small device on the table that translated his clicks and hums into English. The incident was unfortunate but minor. Our technology is designed to work in harmony with your oceans. Perhaps your warning systems are overly sensitive. A military officer spoke next, questioning the placement of the extraction platforms. The conversation became technical, filled with terms Frank didn't understand. Scientists presented data from their monitoring equipment. The Kaltorians responded with their own readings and explanations. After nearly an hour, Dr. Wright raised her hand. I'd like to introduce Mr. Frank Miller. He's a local fisherman with 40 years of experience in these waters. He predicted yesterday's tsunami behavior with remarkable accuracy. All eyes turned to Frank. The Kaltorian's glowing eye organs seemed to intensify slightly. Mr. Miller, would you share your observations about recent changes in our coastal waters? Dr. Wright prompted. Frank cleared his throat. He wasn't used to speaking to rooms full of people. He decided to talk as if he were explaining something to a new deckhand on his boat. Ocean's changing faster than it should, he began. Water temperature is up. Fish patterns are disrupted. Currents are shifting. There's algae blooms where there shouldn't be. One of the government scientists interrupted. We have monitoring equipment tracking all these factors. Your equipment isn't catching everything, Frank said simply. He pulled out his old leather journal. It was filled with handwritten notes spanning decades. I've been keeping records every day. The changes started exactly when the Kaltorians began their extraction. Ambassador Zenthal leaned forward. Our sensors detect no significant negative impact on your ocean ecosystems. Your water is chaotic, undirected. Our process brings order to disorder. Frank looked directly at the alien ambassador. With respect, your sensors are looking for the wrong things. The ocean isn't a single system. It's millions of systems, all connected, all communicating. The room fell silent. Frank continued. I noticed something yesterday. Your platforms are positioned where the ocean floor drops off suddenly. Good spots for certain fish, but dangerous places. Any disturbance there can trigger slides. One of the Kaltorian scientists made rapid clicking sounds. The translator conveyed. Our surveys showed no risk factors at those locations. Frank opened his journal to a page of carefully drawn maps. There's an underwater canyon system that runs along this coast. Parts of it aren't on any official charts, too narrow for sonar to map properly from the surface. But if you fish there, long enough you learn where they are. Dr. Wright projected Frank's hand-drawn maps onto a large screen. She pulled up the official oceanographic charts for comparison. There were clear differences. We've been using satellite and sonar mapping, she explained. But Mr. Miller's knowledge comes from direct observation over decades. The National Security Advisor frowned. Are you suggesting our mapping technology is inadequate? No, Frank replied. I'm suggesting that knowing the ocean takes more than technology. It takes time and experience. Ambassador Zenthal made a gesture with his upper arms. This is unexpected. On our world, we rely entirely on instruments for environmental understanding. The concept of gathering knowledge through feeling is foreign to us. Frank looked at the alien with new understanding. Your world doesn't have oceans anymore, does it? That's why you came here. The ambassador's skin patterns shifted. Our oceans died centuries ago. We have only preserved specimens and historical data. Our instruments are designed based on that knowledge. For the next hour, Frank explained his observations in detail. He showed how Kaltorian extraction points corresponded exactly with disrupted fish migrations. He demonstrated how changing current patterns could affect weather systems coastwide. The Kaltorians conferred among themselves, making rapid clicking sounds. Finally, Ambassador Zenthal addressed the room. We wish to understand this experiential knowledge. Our equipment is clearly missing important variables. We request that human observers join our extraction teams. The government officials looked relieved that the aliens were willing to cooperate. They began discussing logistics of joint monitoring programs and data-sharing protocols. As the meeting wound down, one of the Kaltorian scientists approached Frank. This one was smaller than the others, with lighter-colored skin. I am Vex Nor, Chief Environmental Scientist, the translator conveyed. Your knowledge challenges our understanding. Our species has relied on instruments for so long, we forgot that direct observation has value. Frank nodded. Different ways of knowing. Both have their place. Would you permit us to place sensors on your fishing vessel? To compare what our instruments detect with what you observe? Frank thought about it. He valued his privacy and the quiet time alone on his boat. But something bigger was happening here. On one condition, he said. One of your scientists comes along, sees what I see, feels what I feel. The ocean speaks, in ways your machines don't understand yet. Vexnor's skin patterns shifted rapidly. This is acceptable. I will come myself. As Frank left the meeting, Dr. Wright walked with him to the exit. That went better than I expected, she said. The Kaltorians rarely admit limitations in their technology. Frank looked out toward the ocean. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of orange and gold. Tomorrow he would take an alien fishing. The thought was so strange he almost laughed. Everyone has limitations, Frank said. Even aliens. The ocean teaches humility first. Everything else comes after. Dr. Wright smiled. When will you take Vexnor out? Dawn tomorrow, Frank replied. If these aliens want to understand our oceans, they might as well start at the beginning of the day. As Frank walked home along the shore, he wondered what would come of all this. One thing was certain. The Kaltorians were about to learn that Earth's oceans held more mysteries than their technology could ever measure. The sky was still dark when Frank arrived at his boat the next morning. The air was cool and smelled of salt. Fog hung low over the water. Frank began his usual preparations, checking the engine, arranging his gear, making sure everything was secure. These routines were so familiar he could do them with his eyes closed. A strange sound made him look up. Coming down the dock was Vexnor, the Kaltorian scientist. The alien moved in an odd way, balancing on four legs that bent differently than human knees. Beside him walked Dr. Wright, looking tired but excited. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," she called. "Vexnor is eager to begin. I hope you don't mind if I join you as well." Frank shrugged. "Boat can hold 3. He looked at Vexnor. "Never had an alien on board before. Watch your step." Vexnor moved carefully onto the boat. The vessel dipped slightly under the extra weight. The alien carried a case that presumably held scientific equipment. "Your vessel is primitive," came the translated voice. "But I am honored to experience your method of ocean study." Frank said nothing. He helped Dr. Wright aboard, then untied the ropes. The engine rumbled to life and they pulled away from the dock. The first hint of dawn appeared as they reached open water. Frank navigated by memory and feeling, occasionally, checking his old compass. Vexnor watched everything closely. The alien set up small devices at different points on the boat. "Sensors," Vexnor explained. "They measure water composition, temperature variations, biological activity, and dozens of other factors." Frank nodded. "Your extraction platform is that way?" He pointed east. "But we're not going there yet. Need to show you something else first." For the next hour, they traveled parallel to the coast. The sun rose fully, burning away the fog. The ocean spread out around them, vast and blue. Seabirds circled overhead. Frank cut the engine and let the boat drift. "Here," he said simply. Vexnor looked around, clearly confused. "What is significant about this location? My sensors detect nothing unusual." Frank pointed down. "Watch the water. Really watch it." For several minutes, nothing happened. Dr. Wright looked questioningly at Frank, but he raised a hand asking for patience. Then suddenly, the surface of the water changed. A slight upwelling appeared, creating a subtle dome shape. The color shifted from blue to a deeper greenish blue. "What is happening?" Vexnor asked, his translator conveying excitement. "Cold water rising from below," Frank explained. "Happens every day at this time. Brings nutrients up. That's why." Before he could finish, the water around them came alive. Fish broke the surface, dozens of them, feeding on tiny organisms in the nutrient-rich water. Seabirds dove from above, catching the smaller fish. The peaceful scene had transformed into a feeding frenzy in seconds. Vexnor's skin patterns shifted rapidly. His upper limbs moved in agitation. "None of our surveys detected this phenomenon. How did you know?" Frank smiled slightly. "Been watching it happen for 30 years. It's like a clock. Ocean has its routines just like people do." The aliens. Sensors beeped and flashed. "The data readings are extraordinary. This event creates a complete micro-ecosystem that forms and disperses daily." "That's right," Frank said. "And your extraction platform to the east disrupts the cold water current that feeds this spot. Last week this barely happened. In another week it might stop completely." Dr. Wright took notes rapidly. The environmental impact studies didn't account for these micro-events. Frank started the engine again. "Let's go see your platform now." As they approached the Kaltorian extraction site, the ocean changed. The water became clearer, but somehow less alive. Fewer birds flew overhead. The constant motion that characterized a healthy ocean was diminished. The platform itself was impressive, a gleaming structure that hovered just above the water surface, occasionally extending tubes down into the ocean. Energy fields shimmered around it. Vexnor explained the technology proudly. "It extracts specific mineral compounds without physically removing water, energy efficient and minimally invasive." Frank circled the platform slowly. "Maybe, but you placed it at a junction point." "Junction point?" Both Vexnor and Dr. Wright looked confused. Frank pulled out his journal and opened it to a page with detailed drawings of ocean currents. "Ocean has highways, invisible rivers flowing through it. This spot is where 3 major currents meet. Fish use these currents to navigate. Plankton travel along them. Even the temperature of the whole region is regulated by what happens here." Vexnor consulted his devices. Our instruments detect the currents but categorize this intersection as insignificant. Frank shook his head. Nothing in the ocean is insignificant. Everything connects to everything else. Suddenly, Vexnor's devices began beeping urgently. The alien checked the readings with rapid movements of his forearms. Unusual vibration patterns in the water. Significant biological mass approaching. Frank smiled. Right on schedule. Within minutes, the water around them began to stir. Smooth gray shapes moved beneath the surface. A spray of water shot into the air as a whale surfaced. Then another. And another. Blue whales, Dr. Wright whispered, awe in her voice. A whole pod. The massive creatures surfaced and dove around them, seemingly unconcerned by the small boat. But as they approached the extraction platform, their behavior changed. They became agitated, changing direction erratically. Some made sounds, deep, moans that carried through the water. They're confused, Frank explained. This is part of their migration route, has been for centuries. Your platform's energy field is disrupting their navigation. Vexnor's skin patterns had turned dark blue. Our environmental assessments indicated no impact on large marine life. Did you test your equipment near actual whales before placing it here? Frank asked. No. We used simulation models based on available biological data. Frank gestured toward the distressed whales. No simulation can capture everything. These animals have been swimming these routes longer than humans have. Been building boats. The sky began to darken unexpectedly. Frank looked up. Storm clouds were gathering. Weather's turning, he said. We should head back. Vexnor checked his instruments. Our weather monitoring systems predicted clear conditions all day. Frank laughed softly. Ocean doesn't read your predictions. Storm's coming. A big one. As they turned back toward shore, the first raindrops fell. The wind picked up rapidly. Waves grew larger. Frank guided the boat with practiced ease, adjusting their course as the conditions worsened. Vexnor held onto the side of the boat with two arms while operating his devices with the others. Fascinating, the storm formed directly above the thermal boundary created by the disrupted currents. Our models didn't account for this possibility. Dr. Wright looked worried as the waves grew higher. Is this safe, Mr. Miller? Frank nodded. Boat can handle it. Been through worse. The storm intensified. Rain poured down. Lightning flashed across the sky. Frank remained calm, making small adjustments to keep them on course. Vexnor watched him closely, noticing how the human seemed to anticipate each wave before it came. You feel the patterns in the water, the alien observed, without instruments. Been doing this all my life, Frank replied. Ocean speaks. You just need to learn how to listen. As they neared the harbor, the storm began to ease. Frank guided the boat safely to the dock. Once secured, they all stepped onto solid ground again. Dr. Wright looked relieved. Vexnor seemed deep in thought, his skin patterns shifting slowly. Your knowledge, the alien said finally. It is not in your instruments or your notes, it is in you. This is why our approach has been flawed. We treated your oceans as simple resources, not as complex systems requiring understanding beyond data. Frank nodded. Took me 40 years to learn what I know, and I'm still learning every day. Vexnor's translator conveyed his formal tone. I must report these findings to Ambassador Zenthal. Our extraction procedures require significant modification. As the alien departed, Dr. Wright turned to Frank. You've made quite an impression. I think the Kaltorians are actually going to change their approach. Frank looked out at the ocean, now calm again after the storm. Hope so. Ocean's forgiving, but only to a point. Push it too far and it pushes back harder. The sun broke through, the clouds casting golden light across the water. Frank thought about the day's events. For the first time since the aliens arrived, he felt hopeful. Perhaps humans and Kaltorians together could find a better way forward, one that respected the wisdom of experience alongside the power of technology. 6 months had passed since Frank took Vexnor fishing. The world had changed in ways nobody could have predicted. 3 days after their trip, the Kaltorians had announced a complete halt to all extraction operations. Their massive ships remained in Earth's orbit, but their approach had fundamentally changed. Frank stood on the deck of his boat watching the sunrise. The morning air was crisp and clear. Fishing had been good lately. The ocean was healing itself, returning to the patterns Frank had known for decades, but today he wasn't out to catch fish. He had a different purpose. A shadow fell over the water as a small Kaltorian vessel descended from the sky. It hovered briefly before settling gently onto the ocean surface near Frank's boat. The top section slid open, and Vexnor emerged. The alien scientist moved with more confidence on the water now, having spent many days accompanying Frank on his fishing trips. "Good morning, Frank Miller," the translator device conveyed. Vexnor had begun using Frank's full name, having learned that humans appreciated this form of address. "Morning," Frank replied. "Ready for today?" "Yes. The ambassador and the committee are eager to see the results of our collaborative approach." Frank started his engine. Vexnor's vessel would follow automatically. They headed toward the site, where an extraction platform had once stood. Now something very different was in its place. The new structure was smaller and seemed to float with the currents rather than remaining fixed in place. Its design combined Kaltorian technology with insights from human marine experts. Solar panels and wave energy collectors powered its operations. Most importantly, it moved regularly, never staying in one location long enough to disrupt the ocean's natural flows. As they approached, Frank could see several boats already gathered nearby. One carried Dr. Wright and her team. Another held government officials. A larger Kaltorian vessel hovered above, carrying Ambassador Zenthal and the alien delegation. The past 6 months had seen the formation of the Joint Oceanic Knowledge Exchange, a program combining Kaltorian technology with human experience. Frank had reluctantly accepted a position as senior advisor. At first he had resisted, preferring his solitary life on the water. But the importance of the work had eventually convinced him. Frank brought his boat alongside Dr. Wright's research vessel. She waved in greeting. "Big day," she called out. "The first true collaboration between our species." Frank nodded. He still wasn't comfortable with all the attention, but he had to admit the progress made was impressive. Ambassador Zenthal's voice came through everyone's communication devices. "We gather today to activate the first harmonized extraction module. Unlike our previous methods, this system works with oceanic patterns rather than imposing order upon them." Frank listened as the ambassador explained the technical details. The new module would extract the minerals the Kaltorians needed, but at a pace dictated by the ocean itself. It would never take more than could be naturally replenished. Most importantly, it would continuously adapt based on feedback from both advanced sensors and human observers. When the ambassador finished speaking, he made a gesture toward Frank. None of this would have been possible without the experiential wisdom of Frank Miller. He showed us what our instruments could not see, that true understanding comes from patience and observation, not merely from data collection. Frank felt uncomfortable with the praise. He just nodded briefly in acknowledgement. The activation sequence began. Lights on the new module glowed softly. Unlike the harsh energy fields of the original platforms, these were designed to be harmless to marine life. The system began its work so gently that the water around it barely stirred. For the next hour, scientists from both species monitored the module's performance. The results exceeded expectations. The extraction was proceeding efficiently while disrupting the environment far less than predicted. As the official part of the demonstration concluded, the various boats began to disperse. Frank was preparing to leave when Vexnor approached in a small watercraft. "May I speak with you privately?" the alien asked. Frank nodded, curious. They moved a short distance away from the others. "Our leadership council has been discussing the future of our relationship with Earth," Vexnor began. "We came seeking resources, but we have found something far more valuable." "What's that?" Frank asked. "A new way of understanding," For centuries, our species has relied entirely on technology. We measure, we analyze, we quantify. But we had forgotten how to simply observe, to feel the patterns in nature, rather than just record them. Frank nodded. He understood this better than most humans would. Our council wishes to establish a permanent exchange program, Vexnor continued. Kaltorian scientists would learn from human fishermen, indigenous navigators, and others who carry traditional knowledge. In return, we would share technology that could help protect and heal your oceans. Sounds good, Frank said simply. There is more, Vexnor added. They specifically request that you lead the first training group. 20 of our top environmental scientists would learn directly from you for 1 Earth year. Frank frowned. I'm not a teacher, just a fisherman. That is precisely why it must be you, Vexnor replied. You do not teach with words alone, but with experience. You showed me more in 1 day on your boat than I had learned in years of study. Frank looked out across the water. The thought of 20 aliens following him around was not appealing, but he also recognized the importance of what was happening. 2 very different approaches to knowledge were being bridged. The ocean he loved might benefit from this exchange for generations to come. I'll think about it, he said finally. Vexnor's skin pattern shifted to what Frank had come to recognize as satisfaction. That is all we ask. Later that evening, Frank sat on his small porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The Kaltorian mothership was visible as a bright point of light, distinguishable from the stars now appearing above. His thoughts drifted back to that first day when the aliens had arrived. How strange and threatening they had seemed then. Now he was considering teaching them to fish. The world had changed indeed. Humans were learning to value the knowledge carried by people like him, knowledge not found in books or databases, but in lifetimes of direct experience. And the Kaltorians were learning that not everything worth knowing could be measured by instruments. Frank's old radio crackled to life. It was Dr. Wright. Just wanted to tell you. Her voice came through with a hint of excitement. Preliminary data shows fish populations increasing in all areas where we removed the old platforms. The recovery is happening twice as fast as we predicted, Ocean. Knows how to heal itself, Frank replied. If we let it. The Kaltorians are calling it the Miller Principle now, she said. The idea that some knowledge can only be gained through long-term direct experience. Frank laughed softly. Don't need to name it after me. People have known this since the first boats hit water. After the call ended, Frank continued watching the stars appear. Tomorrow he would go fishing just as he had done for over 40 years. But now his simple boat carried a few of Vexnor's sensors and sometimes an alien observer. The ocean remained. The same in its ever-changing way, but how they understood it was evolving. Frank thought about the Kaltorians' request. 20 alien scientists learning to fish seemed ridiculous, but then again, so had the idea of aliens arriving in the first place. He smiled to himself. Perhaps he would say yes. After all, if a fisherman could change how an advanced alien species viewed the universe, who knew what other impossible things might happen? As darkness fell completely, Frank could see the lights of a small Kaltorian vessel moving across the water in the distance, following the path he had shown them weeks ago, traveling with the current rather than against it, respecting the ocean's ways. The aliens were learning, and so was humanity.